She lost her job and her apartment and inherited a dilapidated house in the middle of nowhere. She wanted to give up until she found a door behind a bookcase that changed her fate. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from the rain had come in the early hours, soft at first, then persistent, soaking into the grass of the cemetery just outside Pittsfield. The sky hung low, the kind of overcast that flattened color and blurred outlines. Trees loomed like quiet sentinels along the perimeter of the burial ground, their branches weighed down by the gray hush of October. The service was small, subdued. A handful of neighbors, a retired co-worker from the county clinic, a distant cousin or two, all dressed in functional black and sheltering under wide umbrellas. Joanne Mello stood near the back, hands folded around her umbrella handle, the dampness crawling up through the soles of her shoes and settling into her bones. She hadn't expected to cry, and she didn't. The woman they buried, Ella Maynard, her mother's only sister, had been a presence from long ago, like a house you remember from a road trip in childhood. Solid, vague, distant. But even so, standing in that small gathering as the wind carried the preacher's words off into the trees, Joanne felt something she couldn't quite name. Not grief exactly, something quieter, almost apologetic. She remembered Ella's hands, how they smelled faintly of peppermint and soap when Joanne was a child curled up beside her on humid summer nights. 3 summers she had spent there, at that old house near some woods she couldn't now picture. She had been 8, 9, and 10 years old, sent by a mother juggling 2 jobs and a string of boyfriends. The memories were hazy but warm. There had been canning jars, garden dirt under fingernails, books that smelled like mildew, and long afternoons where time felt suspended. But then those summers ended. Her mother stopped sending her. Life changed. Ella never came to visit, and over time Joanne folded those memories away like outdated letters in a forgotten drawer. Now Ella was gone, and Joanne wasn't sure what to do with the odd knot sitting under her sternum. The ceremony was brief. No choir, no fanfare. A plain pine casket lowered into the ground, and then the awkward shuffle of attendees dispersing. One of the cousins lit a cigarette as soon as they reached the gravel path. Another asked loudly about the estate, prompting a tight glance from the funeral director. Joanne didn't stay for the coffee hour at the Methodist church. She ducked out and walked toward her rental car, the wind tugging at the hem of her coat. The scent of wet leaves clung to everything. 2 days later, she sat in a narrow office downtown, across from a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The lawyer, Mr. Rollins, according to the cracked nameplate on his desk, sifted through a stack of folders with weary precision. Joanne's presence seemed to trouble him not at all. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat once, then read aloud from a will in a voice that barely lifted above the rustling of the radiator. There was no dramatic reading, no surprise revelations about secret fortunes. Ella Maynard's assets were modest and meticulously divided. A small insurance policy went to a cousin in Tennessee, a chest of silverware to a lifelong friend, a set of quilts, sewn in youth and stored with lavender, to the pastor's wife. And then Rollins hesitated only a moment before reading the next line. To my niece, Joanne Mello, I leave the property located on Sandstream Road in Westbrook County, Vermont, including its land, contents, and all outbuildings. He paused again, then looked up, blinking as though expecting a response. Joanne stared at him. I'm sorry, where? Westbrook County, he repeated. Vermont. It's rural, unincorporated, used to be more active. I believe the town was called Marlow. Marlow. The word tugged something loose in her brain. A porch? A swing? a screen door that creaked just before dusk. She hadn't thought of that name in decades. I didn't know she still owned it, Joanne said, more to herself than to him. She never sold, Rollins said. Taxes were always paid on time. Maintenance minimal, but sufficient. She kept the deed current. Joanne took the folder he slid across the desk. Inside was a manila envelope containing an old map, a set of brass keys, and a handwritten note on thick cream paper. "You'll understand," it read in Ella's spidery script. "One day, if you let yourself." Joanne folded the note and placed it back in the envelope without speaking. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves rattled across the pavement like dry bones. She stood there for a long time in the parking lot, keys in hand, not knowing whether she had been given a gift or a burden. She returned to Cleveland with a suitcase that felt heavier than it should. Her apartment smelled faintly of mildew and detergent, and the hallway buzzed with the sound of a neighbor's television through the thin walls. The space, already small, seemed tighter now. She placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and ignored it. The next morning, she received an email from the school district, a blanket reduction in staffing, her name on the list. The library where she had worked for 6 years, where she had laminated thousands of bookmarks and ordered hundreds of books that children never returned, was reducing hours and cutting non-tenured positions. Hers was the first to go. She spent the rest of the day in a fog. She packed boxes, labeled them with slumping markers, paid what she could on the gas bill. No one called. Her phone remained face down on the couch. She slept with her coat still on. The map lay unopened for 2 days. It was only after she noticed the eviction notice tucked under her door, printed on cheap pink paper, that she picked it up again. The lines of the map were faded, hand-drawn, with Ella's careful labeling marking a path from the main road through a line of trees. There was no GPS coordinate, no Google result. Just a sketch and a phrase at the bottom. "Don't forget who you are." Joanne almost laughed at the sentimentality, but she didn't laugh. She pulled the keys from the envelope, tested their weight in her hand. There were 5 of them, all mismatched, all cold. That night, she sat in her small kitchen, staring at the stained wallpaper and listening to the refrigerator hum like distant thunder. She hadn't spoken to her brother in 6 months. Her father didn't have a number anymore. Her mother was long gone, floating somewhere in a hospice in Florida with a nurse who called every 3rd Thursday to say she was still breathing. Joanne had nothing left to lose, and Ella, silent, strange Ella, had given her something, however cryptic. She bought a one-way bus ticket to Vermont. No return date, no plan. She packed a duffel bag with 3 changes of clothes, a raincoat, and the folder with the map and keys. Her landlord watched her leave without comment. The driver barely looked up when she boarded. The trip took 2 buses and a shuttle that dropped her outside a shuttered gas station with a handwritten sign in the window. Back in 10, maybe. No one greeted her. No one offered help. She started walking. The town of Marlow didn't announce itself. It simply emerged from the trees like a secret trying to remember how to speak. Houses with flaking shutters leaned into one another for support. A post office with one functioning window and a box of community bulletins. A general store with a plastic curtain instead of a door. The road to the house was narrower than she remembered. The trees pressed in close, as if trying to reclaim the gravel. Dust rose around her boots with each step. The air smelled like wet bark and cold moss. The gate appeared first, a rusted thing hanging off its hinges, half swallowed by brambles. Beyond it, the house stood, as it had in her memory, only smaller. The paint had peeled, the roof sagged at one end, and vines curled around the porch columns like forgotten promises. The windows were shut, the shutters cracked. It looked less like a home than a monument to someone else's idea of one, but it was hers. She unlocked the gate with the largest of the brass keys. The latch groaned. The grass was high and wet, brushing against her calves as she walked up the path. The porch steps creaked under her weight. A shutter banged in the wind. At the door, she paused. The final key clicked into the lock with surprising ease. The door opened inward on quiet hinges, revealing a hallway dim with dust and shadow. She stepped inside. The air was cool, not stale. The scent wasn't rot, but thyme. Paper, wood, something herbal and faintly smoky. A hallway stretched ahead, rooms opening left and right. Furniture stood like ghosts under white sheets. The wallpaper was faded but intact. Nothing was broken, only paused. Joanne exhaled. She hadn't been chosen for comfort. She had been chosen for something else. And she had come. The first night in the house passed in a shallow kind of sleep, broken not by dreams but by the creaks and shifts of the building settling around her like a beast stretching its limbs after a long slumber. Joanne curled beneath a quilt she found folded neatly at the foot of one of the beds upstairs, a quilt with edges hand-stitched and faded flowers patterned across its surface. The sheets beneath it were brittle with age, but smelled faintly of cedar, as if someone had tried to preserve them against time. The mattress dipped in the middle. The radiator in the corner wheezed once and then gave up entirely. The silence that followed was not empty, but watchful. She woke before dawn, the sky beyond the curtains still dark, her breath visible in the air. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the scent of the house hit her. Dust, wood, something floral and dry, and memory settled into her limbs. The floor was cold beneath her feet as she stepped into the hallway. The boards groaned with each step, but it was a different kind of sound than she remembered from her apartment. There, everything was thin and hollow. Here, the house groaned like something speaking its own name. In the kitchen, she found a kettle that looked ancient but sturdy. With some effort, she managed to start the stove. A thin flame wavered under the kettle as she searched the cabinets, discovering a half-used box of tea bags and an old tin of sugar that had turned to lumps. The first sip burned her tongue but warmed her chest. She stood at the window, looking out over the overgrown yard. Beyond it, the line of trees still held their leaves, the colors muted in the pale light. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. Otherwise, the world remained still. It wasn't until late morning that she began to explore the house in earnest. The daylight made everything clearer, sharper, but no less mysterious. The rooms were larger than she remembered from childhood, or perhaps her younger self had simply been smaller, more impressionable. In the parlor, beneath a sheet, she found a worn velvet couch with arms smoothed by years of use. The walls were lined with built-in bookshelves, most still filled. The titles ranged from novels with cracked spines to thick almanacs and handwritten ledgers. She moved room by room, pulling back covers, opening drawers, trying to get a sense of the space. Nothing was in disarray. If anything, the house had been kept with care. Minimal, perhaps, but intentional. No sign of squatters, no vandalism, no water damage beyond what time naturally allows. In one of the bedrooms, a vanity stood untouched, its mirror cloudy but unbroken. A pair of gloves sat on the surface, neatly folded. By early afternoon, she found herself in what must have once been Ella's room. The bed was made, a worn sweater draped over the back of a chair. On the windowsill, a cluster of dried lavender lay bundled with twine. The dresser drawers were mostly empty, save for a few slips of paper, a jar of buttons, and a collection of keys, none labeled, all rusted at the edges. She pocketed them, unsure why. It was there, in the corner of that room, where she found the chest. An old, cedar-lined trunk with a brass latch. It wasn't locked. Inside were photographs, bundles of letters tied with a ribbon, and a single stuffed animal that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. She pulled out a stack of photographs and flipped through them slowly. Most were black and white, curling at the corners. Women in long dresses, children barefoot in the grass, a picnic on what appeared to be the very lawn, now overtaken with weeds. One photo stopped her. A young girl, herself unmistakably, on the porch swing, legs dangling, holding a popsicle in one hand. Beside her, Ella, still youthful, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. On the back, in faint pencil, someone had written, "She doesn't know it yet, but she remembers everything." Joanne sat there for a long time, the photo balanced in her lap, the house quiet around her. The following days passed in a rhythm that felt both natural and imposed. She rose with the light, boiled water, drank tea, and moved through the house like someone learning the shape of a forgotten language. Dust floated in beams of sunlight like slow snowfall. Every room held something. A lace curtain still stiff with starch, a stack of letters arranged by date, a Bible with pages underlined in different inks. The third day brought discovery. She had returned to the parlor to explore the bookshelves more carefully. One row in particular drew her attention, not because of the books themselves, but because the shelf seemed deeper than the others. She pressed her fingers along the wood, testing for looseness. There was a faint draft behind the spine of a faded gardening book. When she pulled it out, she noticed a small gap between the back panel and the wall. Her heart beat faster. She set the book aside, then knelt and ran her hand along the shelf. It took some effort and a fair amount of dust inhalation, but the shelf budged. Not easily and not all at once, but there was give, enough to encourage her. She fetched a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, blessedly functional, and returned with a screwdriver. With careful work, she found the hidden latches. When she pressed both, something clicked. The bookshelf didn't swing open so much as slide aside, revealing a narrow gap behind it. She squeezed through, flashlight first. The room was no larger than a walk-in closet, and the air inside was dry and still. Dust swirled in the beam of her light. Shelves lined the walls, packed tightly with boxes, folders, and books. Everything was labeled in Ella's handwriting: dates, names, categories. Midwifery, 1940s, one box read. Another, Letters to Ruth, unopened. The books were a mix of journals, family records, and what appeared to be medical texts, herbal guides, and homemade recipe collections. Joanne's knees gave slightly as she lowered herself to the floor. This wasn't storage. This was an archive. She spent hours there, losing track of time. The air didn't seem to move. It was as though the room existed in a separate current of time altogether. She opened a journal, the pages filled with tightly packed cursive. The date read July 5th, 1938. The writer described delivering a baby during a thunderstorm, alone but for the mother's teenage sister. Another journal, later in the stack, spoke of passing visitors in hushed, coded language. Arrived after midnight, stayed through dawn, quiet folk, didn't eat much. She read until her eyes burned. That night, lying in bed, her mind buzzed with images. The journal entries, the photographs, the letters. What had Ella been doing all those years? Why hide this? Or had it not been hidden, but protected? She remembered the note. You'll understand. One day, if you let yourself. Maybe that day had come. She awoke before sunrise and dressed quickly. She moved through the house with a renewed purpose, opening closets, testing floorboards, mapping out spaces she hadn't noticed before. She returned to the hidden room with a notebook in hand and began to catalog what she found. Birth records, hand-drawn maps, recipes annotated in multiple hands. She began to piece together a timeline, not just of her family, but of the house's place in the community. It had been more than a home. It had been a refuge. In the pantry, behind a stack of crates, she found a false wall. It led to a second narrow space, this one built beneath the stairs. There was a cot, a candle, a child's blanket. She sat down on the wooden floor and let herself feel it all, the enormity of it, the fear that must have lived in these walls, the hope. She returned to Ella's room that evening, sat in the same chair and read through a final letter tucked inside the trunk. I couldn't tell you everything, Ella had written, but I knew you'd listen. The others, they wanted escape. You wanted truth. Joanne folded the letter carefully. She lit a candle in the parlor, then another. The house glowed gently, as if it had been waiting. She was no longer a visitor. She was part of the story now, and she had decided to stay. The decision to stay settled into Joanne not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, accumulating certainty. It wasn't grand or romantic. It came quietly, as she lit candles each evening, as she made lists of the things that needed fixing, as she read the names of women written in faded ink across the pages of hand-bound ledgers. The house seemed to exhale around her, responding to her presence in small ways. A door that stuck began to open more easily. The air, though still damp and cold in places, carried less weight. There was a rhythm forming, one shaped by her hands, her feet across the floorboards, her breath echoing in the quiet rooms. She no longer tiptoed through the house as a guest. She walked with the cautious but intentional steps of someone learning how to live again. The repairs began in earnest. At first, she tried to handle the most urgent problems herself. She patched the kitchen window with plastic she found in the barn and duct tape from the utility drawer. She set a bucket under the leak in the upstairs hallway and placed towels around its base each night. She discovered the water heater wasn't completely dead, only temperamental, and learned to coax it into brief spurts of heat by flipping the fuse switch 3 times in quick succession. Her hands blistered from scrubbing the cellar stairs, from pulling vines off the exterior walls. She wrote out budgets on the back of grocery receipts. There was no money for contractors. There was barely enough for food. The neighbors, at first, were invisible. The town had not changed. The general store remained half-stocked and dimly lit. The gas station had one functioning pump, and the woman behind the counter watched Joanne with the blank disinterest of someone who had seen too many people come and go. But gradually, subtle shifts began to occur. A basket of eggs appeared on the porch one morning, tucked into a crate beside the door. There was no note, just a folded paper towel covering the top. The next day, it was a loaf of cornbread, then firewood, then a small jar of something sweet and golden that tasted of cloves and cider. She wasn't sure who to thank. She left a note on the door. Whoever you are, thank you, Joanne. The next morning, the note was gone. In its place was a slip of paper, folded once, written in neat cursive. Ella never accepted help either. You'll learn. It was signed with only an initial N. One afternoon, while trimming the hedges with a rusted pair of shears, a woman appeared at the fence, elderly, straight-backed, wearing a wide straw hat and a blue dress that flapped gently in the breeze. She leaned on a cane, her other hand gripping the edge of the gate. "I figured you'd be here," the woman said, her voice low and steady. Joanne set down the shears. "Do I know you?" "You don't. But I knew your aunt. I'm Agatha. Folks call me Aggie." Joanne nodded, brushing dirt from her palms. "I'm Joanne." Aggie studied her for a long moment and gave a small nod of approval. "You got her eyes. Same quiet fire." The old woman stepped inside the gate without asking. She walked the perimeter of the porch, peered under the eaves, tapped a post with the end of her cane. "This place has bones," she said, "good ones, but it needs hands, real hands." Joanne wasn't sure what to say, so she said the truth. "I'm trying." Aggie turned toward her, eyes narrowed against the sun. "Then you need Yan. Man's got golden hands. Lives out past the mill road. Doesn't talk much, but he listens to houses. Treats them like living things." She pulled a scrap of paper from her pocket, scribbled a number on it in pencil, and handed it over. "Call him. Tell him Aggie sent you." The call was brief. The man who answered said only, "Yeah," when she introduced herself. She explained who she was, what she needed, and mentioned Aggie's name. A pause followed, long and deliberate. "You got money?" he asked. "Not really," she said. "Enough for materials, maybe." Another pause. "I'll be there tomorrow, 8. He arrived in a dented pickup with no logo and tires that threw gravel when he turned. Jan was tall, broad, older than she expected, with a heavy beard and a long, deliberate gait. He wore overalls and boots caked in dry mud. He didn't smile, didn't shake her hand. He simply nodded once, then walked the full length of the property without saying a word. He examined the roof, knocked on the siding, crouched to inspect the foundation. He even climbed into the crawl space beneath the library wing. After nearly an hour, he returned to the porch and sat in the rocker as if it had been waiting for him. "It's bad," he said, "but not hopeless." Joanne exhaled. "The porch supports are rotten. You've got a slope on the west end. Roof will need redoing before winter. Plumbing's halfway gone. Wiring's old but not dangerous. Yet." He gave her a price she couldn't afford, then added, "You help where you can. I'll stretch the rest." They worked out a plan. He would come twice a week, sometimes 3. She would learn. The first day, he handed her a hammer and a box of nails, and pointed at the back stairs. "Start there," he said. "The house will tell you what it needs." And it did. With every board they replaced, every leak they patched, the house responded. The draft lessened. The floors creaked less angrily. The lights flickered less often. Jan said little as they worked, but when he did speak, his words were practical, reverent even. You treat a house like a corpse, it dies. You treat it like a story, it talks. In the afternoons, Joanne returned to the library. She cataloged more of the journals, created a spreadsheet on her old laptop, took photographs when the light allowed. The deeper she went, the more extraordinary the collection became. There were midwifery records from the 1920s, herbal treatments in both English and French, even one journal labeled Rail Notes that used coded language and symbols. One entry referenced a night lantern for the quiet ones, and another listed initials, dates, and a single word: gone. She contacted a rare books dealer in Boston, who redirected her to a professor at a southern university specializing in African American archives. Dr. Kiernan responded within 24 hours, her tone cautious but intrigued. She asked Joanne to send photos, a brief description of the collection's scope. 2 days later, a young archivist named Carell arrived in a green sedan, wide-eyed and soft-spoken. He carried a small case and a camera and moved through the house like a pilgrim. "This," he whispered upon entering the hidden room, "is a treasure trove." He spent hours documenting, murmuring to himself, touching nothing without gloves. At one point, he looked up at Joanne and said, "You know what you have here, don't you?" "I'm beginning to." He nodded. "Some of these texts don't exist anywhere else. Some are personal histories. Some are medically and historically significant. This is more than a collection. It's a testimony." When he left, he promised a full report and offered to help her connect with institutions that might support the preservation of the materials. But Joanne hesitated. She didn't want to hand the legacy away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That evening, she sat by the fire with one of Ruth's journals, a cup of tea balanced on her knee. The entry described a birth during a blizzard, the firewood nearly gone, the mother screaming in fear. Ruth wrote of singing to her, of boiling water over coals, of catching the baby just before the light went out. The words were precise and strong without embellishment. There was no sentimentality, only truth. Joanne closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. She didn't know what she would do with all this knowledge, not yet, but she knew it couldn't remain hidden. The next morning, she went to the town hall with a borrowed landline number and applied to register a nonprofit foundation. She called it the House of Memory. Its mission, to preserve the materials, to open the archives, to educate. The word spread faster than she expected. A retired teacher offered to help design a curriculum. The general store began stocking donation jars. Carell returned with the camera crew from the university to shoot a short documentary. The town watched, then slowly joined. Agatha showed up again, this time with jars of canned peaches and a ledger. "I'll be your treasurer," she announced without asking. "Someone has to keep your books." On the first official tour, a group of 7th grade girls from Hartford arrived in a borrowed van. They came, shy and giggling, clutching notebooks and snacks. Joanne led them through the house, into the library, through the newly cleared paths. She showed them photographs of women who had delivered babies in darkness, who had hidden strangers in basements, who had written journals by candlelight. She told them stories. She let them read. One girl, with oversized glasses and tightly braided hair, looked up at her with wide eyes. "They were heroes," she said softly. Joanne nodded. Yes, they were. That night, she received a call. The voice was familiar, too much so. "I saw the article," Marcus said without introduction. "That thing about the archive, about Ella's house." Joanne said nothing. "I didn't realize it was all that. I thought it was just land, you know." Still, she said nothing. "I just wanted to say, maybe you were right to stay." She looked out the window, at the stars over the garden, at the porch light she had rewired with Jan last week. "I didn't stay because I were right," she said. "I stayed because I belonged." There was a long pause, then a quiet, "Okay." After the call, she returned to the parlor. The girls had left hours ago, but the space still hummed with the echo of their voices. She placed a new photo on the mantel, herself surrounded by students, one hand resting on the shoulder of the girl with glasses. She lit a fire and opened Ruth's journal to a page she had not yet read. "This house has memory," it said. "Not of grandeur, but of grace." She closed the book and sat in the rocking chair, the same one Ella had favored, now worn smooth by 3 generations. She thought of the woman she had been when she arrived, afraid, discarded, quiet. And she thought of the woman she had become. Not because anyone told her who she was, but because she had listened to the voices that came before, because she had chosen to stay. And the house, no longer waiting, breathed with her. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video and explore the rest of the channel for more powerful stories. And share this video with someone who needs to see it